Hello from the Dukascopy TV studio in Geneva. I'm Daniel Schwenger. Alongside me to discuss the outcomes of the international climate negotiations is Mr. Dirk Forrister. He is President and CEO of the International Emissions Trading Association in Geneva. Hello, Mr. Forrister. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you, Daniel. Good to be here.
Thank you. Do you have for our viewers an outline of what the International Emissions Trading Association is doing?
Sure, I can give you a little flavor of it. IETA is an organization that's been around for about 15 years now. It grew out of the UN climate negotiations as a professional body of companies that are involved in emission markets as they've grown up around the world. So my members include many of the largest energy companies in the world, like Shell and Chevron and BP, as well as companies in the industrial sector, Holcim, Rio Tinto, and then other companies that provide services in those markets, financial services or exchanges. So there are about 140 of them because emission markets are popping up all over the world now, and it's seen as a leading edge solution to climate change. But it does have some very technical aspects that we bring people together to explore from time to time in our working group meetings.
So last month in New York we had the international climate negotiations. Also Ban Ki-moon and 125 heads of governments were there. It was the largest kind of such a summit since 2009. Could you outline sort of the outcomes and the momentum this negotiation created?
Sure. It was, I think the professional negotiators would say it wasn't really a negotiation because this is their bosses coming in at heads of state level and at CEO level to have discussions about what they would like to see over the coming 15 months. Now, certainly there are elements of the negotiation that come into that discussion, but it really was about setting a tone and about providing some direction to negotiators of what they would like to see. But Ban Ki-moon himself wanted to also have a very positive show of force about commitment to solve the climate issue. So you did have heads of state like Barack Obama there speaking, and David Cameron. I know Angela Merkel appeared by video. So they had a number of leaders talk about what they were looking for. And in some ways they talked broad themes around mitigation, how to reduce emissions, around technology solutions, around how to adapt to a changing climate, around finance, and around the importance of carbon pricing. That was the part we were most interested in because that was the topic of the luncheon addresses, and President Hollande of France and the current president of Peru both spoke, emphasizing their intention to make sure that there are good, strong provisions to enable market mechanisms to move forward. You also heard from CEOs. The CEO of Gas de France, for example, GDF, Suez, was there. CEO from Sinopec from China, both speaking about the importance of carbon market solutions. So that's a very powerful signal to negotiators that they need to make sure that they get some good rules of the road for the markets of the future. And that also that this is seen by many world leaders as a central topic of the negotiations and a central element of what needs to come out of France. And this took on a particular life because the World Bank president released a joint statement from governments and businesses that had over 1,000 companies signing on to it and 74 governments, including China, including the European Union, including Russia. So it's a very strong signal that market mechanisms need to be thought about as a part of the Paris solution.
So in 2015, the Paris Declaration is set to be in place and starting for 2020. So we are in a good timeline right now. The schedule is okay.
I think it's good, although I used to be a negotiator when I was in the U.S. government for a while. And one thing is negotiators will use all the time you give them, no matter how long it is. But the second is that timeline can feel kind of like a rush because when you look at the number number of negotiating days that they have together between now and the end of next year, it's actually a fairly limited number of negotiating days because they only come together a couple times a year. I expect they will add some meetings next year just to give them more time together. But they gather next week in Bonn, Germany for sort of a high-level discussions about where to take some of these themes from New York. And then they come together again at ministerial level at the end of this year in Lima, Peru. We call it the Conference of the Parties to the Climate Treaty. They come together once a year to assess their progress. This time they're supposed to talk about the contours of the Paris Agreement, and they're supposed to put forward texts of what they would like to see on some of these key topics. So it's going to be an important year, but it'll only grow more and more intense as 2015 unfolds.
And how does the situation look for in Europe? So there are also important negotiations coming up?
Well, it does, because Europe, along with all of the other major players, have to put forward their initial targets in the first quarter of next year. They're supposed to table those internationally and unveil to the world what their plan is for the 2020 to 2030 period. So next week, we understand that the environment ministers from all over Europe will come together to try to agree on a 2030 goal for Europe. The European Commission has already proposed a 40% reduction in greenhouse gases for the European Union, but we don't know what the Council of Ministers thinks about that. We also have to find out ultimately what the Parliament thinks about that. So next week is critically important because that's when the Council of Ministers will hopefully tell us what they think. They've been in deep discussions already recently, and there's some rifts between Poland and some of the Eastern European countries that want more assistance, and parts of Western Europe that want to see greater and greater ambition. The UK, for example, wants a 50% reduction instead of 40%. So those of us in the business community are watching this very, very closely, mainly because Europe will set the tone for what many other countries do, but also Europe has the most mature carbon market. So embedded in this are some assumptions about the future of the EU emissions trading scheme and what that will do for pricing going forward in Europe. So it's a critically important time.
So these negotiations really set the framework for the mechanism of emission trading. And so, as I understand, emission trading really has a long future.
Well, I think it does, mainly because it's certainly the centerpiece of European progress on emissions trading, on climate change. It's the centerpiece of their policy, so it applies across all of the nearly 30 member states. But it's getting more traction elsewhere around the globe. Right now, China has 7 operating pilot programs on emissions trading in different cities and provinces. One of those provinces, just to give you some flavor of it, is Guangdong. Guangdong is about the size of Germany. So in China, that's considered a pilot program. They're learning from that and intend to announce to the international community what their plan is for a target for the future. But also next year they will have a 5-year plan that comes out that specifies how their emission program will run into the future. And most observers think it will be an emission trading program going broadly across the Chinese economy. So stay tuned for that sometime in 2015. But when you take that step back from that, Europe is using emissions trading, China is using emissions trading, Korea will launch a program next year, Kazakhstan launched a program last year. In the United States, California uses emissions trading. It's linked with Quebec and Canada. You also have the province of Alberta that has an emissions trading program. And the 9 states in the northeastern US use an emissions trading approach to reducing emissions across their economies. So I do think it's here to stay and it's likely to grow. One of the big questions, though, for the international treaty is how can all of these potentially connect to one another? Will they be able to link to one another in a way that reduces costs, improves the economic performance, and enables companies to grow while meeting their emission responsibilities? So I think the tool is here to stay, and hopefully we'll get a good result next year out of Paris that launches a whole new phase of carbon market developments around the world.
Dirk Forrister from the International Emissions Trading Association, thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you, Daniel. It's a pleasure being with you.
And thank you for watching. Do make sure to keep clicking back on the Dukascopy TV website for latest updates and exclusive interviews. Have a great day and see you next time.